Hold this coin in your mind. A small, unassuming piece of silver worth less than your morning coffee. 15 cents. That is all it would cost you today. You could find more money than this in the cushions of your couch, in the cup holder of your car, in the forgotten pocket of an old jacket. And yet, this tiny metal disc, this insignificant speck of silver that you would not bother to pick up if you saw it lying on the street, brought one of the most powerful empires in human history crashing to its knees. 600 years of conquest. Sultans whose names still echo through history. Armies that made the mightiest kings of Europe tremble in their castles. A civilization that stretched across 3 continents, controlling the crossroads of the world, commanding the loyalty of tens of millions of people. And all of it, every last remnant, undone by something you could lose between your fingers without even noticing. The Ottoman Empire did not fall to foreign invaders storming its gates. It was not destroyed by plague, by famine, by the wrath of vengeful gods. It was murdered by its own money. Slowly. Methodically. Inevitably. And here is what should terrify you down to your very core: the exact same thing is happening right now, today, in economies all around the world. The weapon that killed the Ottomans is still loaded. It is still aimed. And it is still firing. You just cannot see it yet. But after the next 20 minutes, you will never look at money the same way again. The year is 1299, and in a small, dusty corner of Anatolia, in a land that had seen empires rise and fall for millennia, a tribal leader named Osman is laying the foundation for something extraordinary. He does not know it yet. He cannot possibly imagine that his descendants will one day rule from the shores of the Adriatic to the sands of Arabia, from the grasslands of Hungary to the mountains of Yemen. He is simply a warrior, a leader of men, carving out territory in the chaos left behind by the collapsing Seljuk Sultanate. But the seed he plants will grow into an oak tree that overshadows the entire world. Over the next 2 centuries, Osman's descendants accomplish what seems impossible. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II, whom history will call the Conqueror, achieves what no one has managed in over 1,000 years: he breaches the walls of Constantinople. The city that has stood as the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of Rome itself, the greatest fortress in the Christian world, falls to Ottoman cannons and Ottoman courage. The Hagia Sophia, for nearly a millennium the greatest church in Christendom, becomes a mosque. The Byzantine emperor dies on the walls, fighting to the last breath. And a new era begins. The Ottomans are no longer a regional power. They are now a world empire. The expansion does not stop. It cannot stop. The Ottoman war machine, fueled by conquest and the promise of glory, pushes into Europe like a tide that nothing can halt. Belgrade falls in 1521. Hungary is crushed at the Battle of Mohacs in 1526. The armies of Suleiman the Magnificent, the greatest of all Ottoman sultans, reach the gates of Vienna itself in 1529. All of Christian Europe holds its breath, praying that the walls will hold, that the infidel tide will be turned back. The walls do hold, barely, and Vienna survives. But the message is clear: no one is safe from Ottoman power. In the other direction, the empire swallows the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, making the Ottoman Sultan the guardian of Islam's most sacred sites. Egypt falls under Ottoman control. The North African coast, from Libya to Algeria, acknowledges Ottoman suzerainty. The Black Sea becomes an Ottoman lake, and the eastern Mediterranean follows. Trade routes that have connected east and west for millennia now run through Ottoman territory, and every merchant who passes pays tribute to the Sultan. At the heart of all this power, at the center of this vast machinery of conquest and administration and commerce, there is a coin. It is called the Aki. A small silver piece, minted with exquisite precision in Constantinople's imperial mint, each one containing approximately 1.15 grams of pure silver. When you hold an Aki in your hand, you hold more than metal. You hold a promise. You hold the full faith and credit of the mightiest empire on earth. Soldiers are paid in Aki. Merchants conduct their trade in Aki. Taxes are collected, debts are settled, marriages are dowried, and inheritances are divided, all in Aki. This humble silver coin is the lifeblood of the Ottoman economy, the circulatory system of an empire that spans 3 continents. For generation after generation, the Aki remains stable. Its silver content does not change. Its purchasing power holds steady. A janissary serving in the armies of Mehmed II can trust that the Aki he receives will be worth the same as the Aki his grandfather received. A merchant in Damascus can accept Aki from a trader in Budapest, confident that the coin is genuine, that its value is real, that the promise it represents will be honored. This stability is not an accident. It is a policy, carefully maintained by the imperial treasury, jealously guarded by sultans who understand that money is the foundation upon which all else rests. The Aki is more than currency. It is the physical manifestation of Ottoman legitimacy. But no empire lasts forever. No promise goes unbroken. And no coin, no matter how carefully guarded, is immune to the forces of history. The trouble begins far from Ottoman lands, in a place the sultans have never seen and whose name they would struggle to pronounce. In the mountains of what is now Bolivia, in a city called Potosi that sits at an altitude so extreme that newcomers struggle to breathe, Spanish conquistadors have discovered a mountain made of silver. The Cerro Rico, the rich mountain, contains more silver than anyone has ever imagined. Native laborers, worked to death in conditions of unspeakable brutality, extract this silver and send it across the Atlantic in great galleons. Spain, which has conquered the New World, now controls more precious metal than all the kingdoms of Europe combined. This silver does not stay in Spain. It cannot. Spain imports almost everything it consumes, from grain to textiles to manufactured goods. The silver flows out to pay for these imports, spreading across Europe like a great metallic flood. From Europe, it flows further still, chasing the luxury goods of the East, the spices of India, the silks of China, the precious commodities that European appetites demand. And the routes to the East run through Ottoman territory. By the late 16th century, the empire that controls the crossroads of the world finds itself awash in silver that it did not mine, did not request, and does not know how to absorb. The laws of supply and demand are as merciless as any conquering army. When silver becomes abundant, its value decreases. When the value of silver decreases, prices rise. And when prices rise, something happens that the Ottomans have never experienced: inflation. The word would not be coined for centuries, but the phenomenon is immediate and devastating. Suddenly, the Aki that could once buy a loaf of bread can only buy half a loaf. The Aki that could once pay a soldier's monthly expenses now leaves him scrambling for supplemental income. The Aki that merchants once accepted without question now prompts hesitation, negotiation, suspicion. Something is wrong with the money. Something fundamental has broken. The treasury officials in Constantinople are not fools. They see what is happening. They understand, perhaps not in the theoretical terms that modern economists would use, but in the practical language of budgets and payrolls and tax receipts, that the silver flooding into their economy is destroying its value. But what can they do? They cannot stop the silver from coming. They cannot force prices back down by imperial decree. They are trapped in a situation that has no good solutions, only bad ones and worse ones. The temptation whispers softly at first. The treasury is running short. The janissaries must be paid. The armies must be maintained. The bureaucracy must function. There is not enough silver coming in from taxes to cover the expenditures. But there is a solution, an easy solution, a solution that seems almost magical in its simplicity. The mint that produces Aki is under imperial control. The amount of silver in each coin is a matter of policy, not physics. What if, instead of putting 1.15 grams of silver in each Aki, the mint put in only 0.9 grams? Or 0.7 grams? Suddenly, the same amount of silver produces more coins. More coins mean more payments. More payments mean the crisis is solved, at least for now. This is debasement. It is, in essence, a hidden tax, a way for the government to pay its bills by stealing value from every person who holds money. It has been practiced by empires throughout history, from Rome to China, and it has destroyed every single one of them that has embraced it too eagerly. The Ottomans know this history. Their scholars have read the chronicles of Rome's decline, have traced the connection between debased denarii and collapsing legions. And yet, faced with the immediate pressure of unpaid soldiers and empty treasuries, they do it anyway. The first major debasement comes in 1586. The ackee, which has contained 1.15 grams of silver for generations, is reduced to 0.68 grams. Overnight, the empire has essentially told everyone holding ackee that their money is now worth 40% less. The reaction is swift and violent. In 1589, the Janissaries of Constantinople revolt. These are not peasants or common soldiers. These are the elite of the Ottoman military, the personal guards of the Sultan, the men who have conquered nations and terrified kings. And now they are rioting in the streets of the capital, demanding that their wages be restored to their former value, that the debasement be reversed, that justice be done. The Sultan, caught between the demands of his treasury and the fury of his soldiers, chooses a scapegoat. The Grand Vizier, the second most powerful man in the empire, is blamed for the debasement and executed. His body is thrown to the mob. The Janissaries are temporarily satisfied. But the underlying problem remains. The treasury is still empty. The silver is still flooding in from the New World. Prices are still rising. And the temptation to debase, once indulged, becomes harder and harder to resist. Over the next century, the ackee is debased again and again and again. Each time the treasury runs short, officials face the same impossible choice: default on their obligations, raise taxes to the breaking point, or reduce the silver content of the coin. Each time, they choose debasement. By 1600, the ackee contains only 0.29 grams of silver, barely a quarter of its original value. By 1650, it contains 0.19 grams. By 1700, it is down to 0.13 grams, a mere shadow of the coin that once symbolized Ottoman strength. Each debasement teaches the population the same lesson: the money cannot be trusted. And so they adapt. Wealthy Ottomans begin to hoard older coins, coins minted in better times, coins with higher silver content. These coins become treasures, saved and hidden, removed from circulation. The newer, debased coins are the ones that circulate, the ones that are spent as quickly as possible before they lose even more value. This is Gresham's law in action: bad money drives out good. The ackee has become two currencies, one good and hoarded, one bad and despised. But the consequences extend far beyond mere economics. Money is not just a medium of exchange. It is a system of trust, a network of promises, a mechanism that binds people to each other and to the state. When money fails, trust fails. When trust fails, everything fails. The Janissaries who once formed the backbone of Ottoman military power become increasingly unreliable as their real wages decline year after year. Their loyalty, once fierce and unconditional, becomes contingent on pay and bonuses. They involve themselves in politics, king-making and king-breaking, more interested in who will fill their purses than who will lead them to glory. The elite soldiers who conquered Constantinople become a Praetorian Guard, selling the throne to the highest bidder. The provinces follow a similar trajectory. Local governors, called pashas, are supposed to collect taxes and send them to Constantinople. But when the money they send is returned to them as debased coinage, when the central government seems unable or unwilling to maintain the value of the currency, the incentive to remain loyal weakens. Why send good money to a capital that will only cheat you? Pashas begin to keep more for themselves, to build their own local power bases, to treat their provinces as personal fiefdoms. The empire, which once operated as a unified whole, begins to fragment into competing centers of power. The 17th century is a long, bloody nightmare for the Ottomans. The Janissary revolts become more frequent and more deadly. In 1622, Sultan Osman II, a young and ambitious ruler who sees clearly that the Janissaries have become a liability rather than an asset, attempts to reform the military. He plans to recruit new soldiers from Anatolia, peasants loyal to him rather than to their own corporate interests. The Janissaries learn of this plan. They storm the palace. They drag the Sultan from his throne. And on May 20, 1622, they murder him with a bowstring, the traditional method of Ottoman regicide that avoids the spilling of royal blood. Osman II is the first Ottoman Sultan to be killed by his own soldiers. He will not be the last. The pattern repeats throughout the century. Sultan Ibrahim, mentally unstable and politically weak, is deposed and executed in 1648. Sultan Mehmed IV, after a long and troubled reign marked by military defeats and economic chaos, is deposed in 1687. The throne becomes a prize to be seized and lost, a chair that no one can sit in safely. Each new sultan faces the same impossible calculations: how to pay the soldiers, how to maintain the empire, how to do anything when the money itself is rotten. Meanwhile, the world beyond Ottoman borders is undergoing a transformation that the sultans and their advisors can barely comprehend. The silver that has flooded the global economy, the same silver that has destabilized the Ottoman currency, is being put to very different uses in Western Europe. England, France, and the Netherlands are building empires of their own, not just territorial empires but commercial ones, networks of trade and manufacture and financial innovation that will reshape the world. The same decades that see the Ottoman Empire spiraling into chaos see the founding of the Bank of England, the Dutch East India Company, the financial instruments that will power the Industrial Revolution. The military implications become clear with horrifying speed. Ottoman armies, once the terror of Europe, begin to suffer defeats that would have been unthinkable a century earlier. The Battle of Vienna in 1683 is not just a failure to capture the city, it is the beginning of a rout. The following years see Ottoman territory shrinking for the first time in centuries, as the Habsburgs retake Hungary and the Venetians capture the Peloponnese. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699 formalizes the losses, forcing the Ottomans to acknowledge that their tide has turned, that they are no longer the conquerors but the conquered. And behind every defeat, behind every lost province and every signed treaty, the acquis continues its downward spiral. By the 18th century, the coin is almost a joke. A shepherd in Anatolia or a craftsman in Cairo still receives acquis for his labor, still uses acquis to buy what he needs, but everyone understands that these coins are tokens, symbols of a value that has long since disappeared. New currencies are introduced in an attempt to restore confidence. The kurush, subdivided into 40 acquis, becomes the new standard of account. But the disease is in the system, not in any particular coin, and no rebranding can cure it. The 19th century brings reformers who see clearly what has gone wrong and struggle desperately to fix it. Sultan Mahmud II, who reigns from 1808 to 1839, finally destroys the Janissaries in an event that Ottoman historians call the Auspicious Incident. On June 15, 1826, the Janissaries revolt once again, expecting the usual pattern of negotiation and concession. Instead, Mahmud turns the cannons on them. The Janissary barracks in Constantinople are bombarded, set aflame, reduced to rubble. Thousands of Janissaries are killed in the bombardment or executed in the purges that follow. The core that has dominated Ottoman politics for centuries is annihilated in a single day. But the Janissaries are a symptom, not a cause. Removing them does not restore the value of the currency. It does not rebuild the trust that centuries of debasement have destroyed. It does not undo the fundamental reality that the Ottoman Empire has spent centuries spending more than it earns, debasing its money to cover the difference, and eroding the foundations of its own power. Mahmud II and his successors, the architects of the Tanzimat reforms, try to modernize the empire, to create new institutions, new armies, new systems of governance. But all of this costs money, and money is exactly what the empire does not have. The Ottomans turn to European banks. Loans flow in from London and Paris, at interest rates that seem manageable at first but compound into crushing obligations. By the 1870s, the empire is spending more than half of its revenues just on debt service, paying interest on loans that have been used to pay interest on earlier loans. In 1881, the foreign powers imposed the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, a body controlled by European creditors that takes over much of the empire's fiscal authority. The Ottomans have traded their economic sovereignty for short-term survival, mortgaging their future to pay for their present. The final act of this tragedy plays out in the fires of World War I. The Ottoman Empire, seeing a chance to regain lost territory and lost prestige, joins Germany and Austria-Hungary in their war against the Allied powers. It is a catastrophic miscalculation. The war brings military defeat on every front, from Gallipoli to Mesopotamia to the final Allied breakthrough in Palestine. It brings the Armenian genocide, a horror that still haunts the region a century later. And it brings the final collapse of Ottoman finances, as the empire prints money without limit to fund a war it cannot win. By 1918, Ottoman currency is essentially worthless. Inflation has reached levels that make the debasements of the 16th century seem modest by comparison. Soldiers fight for wages that cannot buy a meal. Civilians face starvation as farmers refuse to sell food for paper that loses value by the hour. The empire that once controlled the crossroads of the world cannot feed its own people. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 attempts to formalize the partition of Ottoman territory. The Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 recognizes the reality that has already emerged: the Ottoman Empire is dead, replaced by the Republic of Turkey and a collection of new states carved from its former provinces. The last Sultan, Mehmed VI, flees Constantinople aboard a British warship on November 17, 1922, a humiliating end to a dynasty that had ruled for 6 centuries. The Caliphate, the religious institution that made the Ottoman Sultan the leader of Sunni Islam, is abolished by the new Turkish Republic in 1924. The Aki, long since worthless, passes into history. 600 years. 3 continents. Tens of millions of subjects. Armies that conquered nations and terrified the world. All of it brought down, ultimately, by a small silver coin worth 15 cents. The Aki did not act alone, of course. There were wars and plagues, bad sultans and worse viziers, technological changes and geopolitical shifts. But at the heart of every crisis, behind every failed reform and every lost war, was the fundamental fact that the Ottomans destroyed their own money. They debased the Aki when they should have maintained it. They chose short-term survival over long-term stability. They broke the promise that every coin represents, and once that promise was broken, nothing else could hold. This is not ancient history. This is prophecy. Look at the world today. Look at the currencies that dominate global trade, the dollars and euros and yuan that make the modern economy function. Are they backed by silver? By gold? By anything tangible at all? No. They are backed by nothing but promises. Promises made by governments that run perpetual deficits, that borrow trillions to fund today's spending, that print money whenever a crisis demands it. The Aki lost more than 90% of its silver content over 4 centuries. The United States dollar has lost more than 96% of its purchasing power in a single century. The pattern is the same. The mechanism is the same. The pressures are the same. And the outcome, if nothing changes, will be the same. The coin that destroyed the Ottomans is still with us. It has changed its name, changed its face, changed its form. But its nature is eternal. It is the temptation to create value from nothing, to pay today's bills with tomorrow's trust, to break promises in ways that seem painless until the bill comes due. That coin is in your wallet right now. It is in your bank account, in your pension fund, in the economy that surrounds you. And it is doing its work, slowly, patiently, just as it did in Constantinople 500 years ago. The Ottomans could not escape the trap they created. They could not undo centuries of debasement, could not rebuild trust once it was destroyed, could not turn back the clock to a time when the Aki meant something. They rode the debasement down to oblivion, each generation making the same mistakes as the last, each crisis responded to with the same poison that caused it. In the end, the empire did not fall. It dissolved. It rotted from within until there was nothing left but a hollow shell, and then even the shell collapsed. We still have choices they did not have. We still have time they had already wasted. We still have the ability to learn from their mistakes, to change course before the current becomes irreversible, to choose sound money over easy money, hard truths over comfortable lies. But the window is closing. The debasement continues. The trust erodes. And the Aki waits, patient as ever, to claim another empire. If this story has changed how you think about money, about history, about the invisible forces shaping our world right now, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what part of the Ottoman collapse surprised you the most? Do you see echoes of their mistakes in today's economy? And if you believe that these warnings from history, these lessons written in the rise and fall of empires, deserve to be heard by more people, then you already know what to do. Share this with someone who needs to understand what money really is. Come back for more stories that reveal the hidden machinery behind our civilization. Because the past is never truly past. It is prologue. And what happens next is up to us.